Finally,
All
finally.
right. Superb. Okay. So it was a question of just earphones matching. All right. Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone, for your help.
perfect.
Welcome again to the session on International Tiger Day. Wishing all of you, on behalf of me and all my colleagues, a happy Tiger Day. And before we start, we'll just quickly introduce ourselves. Those of you who already know us, this introduction may not be necessary, but I'm seeing a lot of names that I've not seen before. I don't know. So, Kiran, could you quickly please introduce yourself?
My name is Kiran Rahaikar and the handle is Kadak Photo. It was supposed to click, I was supposed to click good photos and post, but today I'm talking about tigers and on an International Tiger Day with the tiger number increasing. So all
Yeah.
things good and now the voice is better. So things moving in a good direction, upward direction.
Yes.
So currently I am working with WCT and my work area is predominantly about law enforcement and mostly the training part, the training component of law enforcement, because at the end of the day, it is the forest department who does the law enforcement bit, actual groundwork, and we as NGOs give them all the support system that is required. So I am training a lot of frontline forest staff, and this I'm doing in WCT for the last 8 years now, from 2012, and currently because of lockdown scenario, the trainings are not happening. But this is a new way that we are connecting to a larger audience on this good day of International Tiger Day. Yep.
Okay,
Over
cool.
to you.
Thanks. So my name is Samyukta. I've been working with the Wildlife Conservation Trust since 2016. When I first joined, I used to train with Kiran and his team in the forest department. We used to conduct training programs that would entail law enforcement, forensics, site security, everything all together. And now we've kind of diversified the programs. Kiran focuses purely on law enforcement, and I focus on developing forensic capacity and for all law enforcement agencies, just like Kiran does, right? So start this off. I think that all the sessions before us shed a lot of light on all the aspects in terms of connectivity that are bothering wildlife. So maybe what we need to talk about in addition is, and since it's International Tiger Day and we've had great news on the fact that tiger numbers are going up, Kiran, I'll shoot a few questions and I would like for you to throw some light and I'll also add my thoughts in. Yeah. Okay. So firstly, as far as illegal wildlife trade is concerned, and since that's one of the big topics, hot topics around tigers all the time, how big a threat do you think that really is to tigers and the rest of wildlife?
Correct. Since the theme of the day is connectivity, I'll like to connect the legal side to connectivity
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So I'm having this book which is ulta because of the thing. So it's like this. So it reads like the section 38 says, ensure the tiger reserves and areas linking of one protected area or tiger reserve with another protected area or tiger reserve are not diverted for ecologically unsustainable use, except for public use in greater interest and all that. But the theme I want to highlight is even legally, connectivity has been given a shield, and legally we are binding factor is we have to ensure that there is connectivity between two tiger corridors, or for that matter, two forest corridors. And just a couple of talks back, Girish pointed out how a tiger from Chandoli, that is Sahyadri Tiger Reserve, went all the way up to Anshi Dandeli, Kali Tiger Reserve. So overall, the connectivity in the Western Ghats is highlighted because of this. But then the law also tries to protect that kind of connectivity. Now, the law is there on paper, as they say, but then we need hands and legs to implement that law. Because if you take the example of that same tiger which kind of walked 300 kilometers, he would have easily encountered at least 30 villages, looking at Indian scenario and population. So in those 30 villages there would have been at least if there are 100 people staying there, there would have been, he had at least encountered 3,000 people. Some of them might be poachers, some of them might be involved in illegal activities, some of them might not be involved in focused tiger hunting, but even activities which can be as easy as throwing a plastic bag which is of insecticide into a water hole can cause that tiger mortality. So animals are very vulnerable that way, even outside the protected area as well as inside the protected area. That's why you need the ambit of law in order to protect them. But at the same time, you need hands and legs that are on ground, which are like the frontline soldiers who will implement those laws. That's where the law enforcement part comes in. So these are the two major criteria that we need to focus on. So one is the legal aspect and another is the enforcement aspect. So legally, there are many laws for every kind of interaction that we have, whether it will be an international, inter-country kind of trade or illegal trade for that matter. There are laws. There is CITES agreement. There are customs acts of various countries which enforce strict measures for transportation, trade, and exchange of wildlife products. But still, there is a lot of smuggling that keeps on happening. And internationally, that trade is into billions of dollars. It is just in the contraband market, it's just second to narcotics trade. So wildlife trade is huge. And there also, it involves a lot of syndicate, which are involved with other illegal activities like human trafficking, narcotics, arms, and those kind of illegal businesses. So this is a huge lucrative market for them as well. So players which are focused on wildlife only, as well as the overall underworld people or people linked with terrorism, all have been involved in one way or the other in wildlife trade. So there is a huge spectrum, as we can say, right from a local person who is killing one hare or a rabbit or a small bird to a person who is poaching tiger or elephant for ivory trade and big trade in, say, China or some other place. So that spectrum is quite wide that way in terms of wildlife trade.
Okay. Since you mentioned, I mean, like you rightly said, this is a session on connectivity and we need to kind of tie everything back in. Do you think that increasing connectivity around our protected areas is also increasing the threat to our wildlife from illegal wildlife trade and demand?
Correct. So if you take a look at any picture, the wildlife area, the wildlife corridor will be a wildlife sanctuary or a national park or a tiger reserve will be an island kind of thing where there is a lot of population there. And then, so it will be like my palm, and then the connectivity will be like my fingers. So it will be going in long stretches. So there will be a lot of edges, and these edges most probably will have villages or roads or some other activity where there is a human dominance. So once a human dominated landscape is around an area where there is wildlife, inherently there will be some kind of hunting, poaching, or activities which will be detrimental to wildlife. That's why those areas are very vulnerable for the movement of wildlife, and the maximum threat comes from the fringes, because nowadays the edges are very hard. So either you are in a forest in a controlled environment, or again you are directly inside a village or on a main highway, 4-lane highway, or in a city for that matter, like Mumbai. If you are outside of Sanjay Gandhi National Park, you are straight away on some road or on a railway track or something like that. So that's why there we need to have a stricter enforcement, or for that matter, a more vigil, I will say, rather than enforcement, so that it percolates into protection of leopards, tigers, animals, wildlife in general.
Okay. I mean, we've kind of jumped right into the deep end of the swimming pool, and we've gone right into illegal wildlife trade. For those of our viewers who are kind of still new to the concept of crime, Could you just shed light on the various kinds of crime that maybe in our forests are more prevalent than like what you would see in, say, other countries, or what gets written about more commonly in the papers?
Correct. So, if we focus purely on wildlife crime or crime related to wildlife, again the spectrum is huge. Person might do certain things which are against law for subsistence value. Say he has to build a house, he goes into a forest and cuts a tree. That may also be qualified as a crime
Right.
against wildlife. Or subsistence hunting is also prevalent all across the globe. And as we know, humans have evolved from a hunter-gatherer kind of a system, and that urge for hunting is very much prevalent. Until the
Right.
last animal is standing, somebody will want to hunt it. So it is instinctive for that matter, if we can say that. So hunting is still going on in terms of subsistence, in terms of putting food on the plate. That kind of level of hunting is also there. And
Okay.
that at the extreme end of the timeline is somebody killing 1,000 elephants for ivory. That kind of hunting is trade based, where the urge is need is only purely commercial, exploitative kind of thing. Like you go and mine a certain area and you
Yeah.
go and dig a pit and get some sand out of it. So these are the two kind of extremely different spectrum at the number line, if you can say. Secondly, in terms of hunting, there can be different kinds of hunting as well, like something like
Right.
a focused hunting, where you go and hunt a tiger for its skin. You go and hunt a leopard for its skin. You go and hunt a bear for its bile. You go and hunt a elephant for its ivory. Or it can be a generic kind of thing that you go and put a net across a stream, and whatsoever is gets entangled into the net, it gets hunted. So that can be a generic hunting. People do specific hunting in terms of retaliatory killings. Now,
Right.
with connectivity and animals moving around, they can also hunt certain domestic animals, or they can prey on certain domestic livestock, and that might cause bit of a shuffle in the system, as they say, and then that can cause a retaliation in terms of poisoning the dead cow
Right.
carcass and that killing a tiger. But then
Right.
the tiger gets killed, then
Right.
a scavenger like a hyena comes and scavenges on the same animal, it also dies. Crow also comes and eats, vulture also comes and eats. So then it becomes into a non-specific kind of a scenario where then
Right.
multitude of animals get killed. So
Right.
these are different kind of things. And second, the most important thing that I want to focus, since it's about connectivity, electrocution and snaring. These are the two
Yeah.
things which have emerged as one of the biggest threats, because now that electricity supplies are all over the place and electrification is a big move is happening all over the country. With electricity, the wires come and then that causes electrocution, where you tap into the electric supply, overhead supply illegally, and
Right.
try to hunt animals. So these are the broadly kind of threats that wild animals face all across the country, if I can put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to add on just one quick point to
Yeah.
what Kiran's talked in, elaborate about all the various crimes that, he and Kiran has a wonderful set of dogs that he uses to help train in, which he'll talk about in due course of time from this interview. But there's also a demand for pets, right? So people living in Bombay, Bangalore, Hyderabad, you see pet markets on a daily basis. And this is also something that poses a threat to wildlife within India. It's a common misnomer that only exotic species are, being sold in these markets. But there are also animals that are used for black magic, or meat, or feng shui, or just pets, or religious practices, or people just want to buy those animals and release them for a sense of moksha. So there are all of these practices also relevant that are impacting India's wildlife. And I think it's important that everyone who's joining in is aware about this and kind of grows their awareness to understand these better. Okay. People are already sending in questions, which is
Some
great. We're going
questions,
to save some of them for the end. I think one Kiran has kind of already covered, talking about the wildlife, the kinds of wildlife crime that are common in India. And somebody
that is
asked,
covered.
we'll come back to them when we kind of move forward. So please hold on. Keep sending us
Yeah,
your
yeah.
questions. We'll answer them all together.
I'll
Okay.
address the punishment bit later.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
also one question.
Okay, so because my next question to you is, how is wildlife crime dealt in India? And
Correct.
in your experience of having trained with the forest department all these years, what do you think is really lacking, and what are the areas that need improvement?
Correct. So, as far as dealing with wildlife crime comes, there are basically two main laws. One is Indian Forest Act 1927, so it's almost 100-year-old
Yeah.
act, and that primarily deals with all the wildlife-related crimes outside the protected area umbrella. So there are protected areas and there are non-protected areas and forests. So outside the protected areas, Wildlife Indian Forest Act is applicable mostly. And inside the protected area, the act which is applicable is Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So these are the two main acts that is being used widely to deal with the wildlife related crimes across the country. Uh, most of the crimes, like the most commonest of crime is tree cutting, illicit felling, is the most commonest of all the crimes of related to wildlife. That I think it's covered. That question is covered. So
Yeah.
these are the mostly two acts. Now the acts are there, and there are various provisions under this act. But then the problem comes in implementation of the act and enforcement of the act. Okay, so these are two things. Enforcement is like you go and catch hold of somebody, you go and go onto the crime scene and process the crime scene, which Samyukta will talk about in greater detail.
Yeah.
So that is one part of the story. Second is going into the courts and actually winning the case. That is second part of the story. So this, which we say criminal jurisprudence in the bigger term, this is the problem that is lacking, and that I think Samyukta will address a bit more. And
Sure.
that's why we have this big component of forensics involved, because that is very much a requirement which we have come across because this is across the country. What has happened is there is a lot of problem in collection of evidence, processing of those evidence, and maintaining the sanctity of those evidences. So this is the forensic part, and that's why Samyukta is purely focusing on these elements, because all these cases are heavily reliant on evidence and corroborative evidence. So Samyukta, I think you should
Sure.
talk a bit more now.
I think
about
before
all
I
this.
do
Yeah.
that, do you want to answer the question of what is the punishment?
Yeah,
there is a
punishment
question
I'll
that's
answer,
of
because
punishment
since
for
it's,
poachers.
dealing
Yeah,
with
related
law.
to what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
So in India, see, basically there are two kinds of punishments. Okay. So one is either you get fined for something or you get jailed. You get
Fine
a
and
term sentenced
yeah.
into a jail that is commonly termed as. So in terms of Wildlife Protection Act, it's a bit severe than the Indian Forest Act. Wildlife Protection Act has various degrees of punishments. Okay, so one set of punishment is it depends on what kind of crime you have committed, how severe that crime is. So, like say, consider tiger is the most protected animal in country. It's a scheduled 1 species. So if you hunt a tiger, then it's like the topmost of the crimes that you can commit. So in that case, you can get punishment which is not less than 3 years of imprisonment. Okay, so and that can go up to 7 years in certain cases if the place is tiger reserve, core area, and there are various aspects to it. Or even it can go up to life imprisonment if you are a repeated offender, if you have repeatedly doing things, if you have killed say something like 30 tigers, it can even go up to life imprisonment. And in terms of monetary fines, the fine can range up to from 0 rupees or 10 rupees to about 50 lakhs as well, because that's the spectrum. So it depends on different things, and at times you have to get imprisoned, as in there are certain provisions where imprisonment is a must, and certain provisions where there is only fine or only imprisonment. So there is this is the entire spectrum of punishment. So yes, it can go up to life imprisonment if that is the ultimate. Yeah. Now over to
Okay.
you.
Thanks. Okay, so to add on to what Kiran said, a lot of you are asking about, how is wildlife crime dealt? How, for example, somebody's question that has become the central question of this conversation is, what is the punishment for poachers if found guilty? I think you've asked a very important question, because the last part of your question, if found guilty, is where we're facing the biggest problem. Is how do we make sure that the forest department, from at the point when they discover the crime scene, right up to when the case is presented in the court, how do they ensure that all the evidences they collect, they package, they send to a lab, they have processed the reports, and how do they then present it in front of a judiciary? All of these are very important determining factors to decide and actually impact the decision of the judge as to whether a certain person is guilty or not. Right? So that's one level of science. Over and above that, unfortunately, given the nature of wildlife crimes and the way in which most wildlife crime scenarios are discovered, a lot of the times physical evidence is not found in a way in which forensic scientists can do much with it. As a result, very often forest officers don't have the capability to prove a fact beyond reasonable doubt, which, like Kiran said, criminal jurisprudence, it's a very basic principle on which a judge will work. So if a fact that a forest officer is saying X person was my poacher, I caught him with so-and-so prohibited articles, if the forest officer is not able to prove all of the claims he is making beyond reasonable doubt, then the judge will not be able to handle the sentence that the law prescribes for it. As a result, very often you will see people are let off on bail, or they are able to get reduced sentences or have no sentencing at all, because the case is not able to establish what the forest officer or the enforcement officer wants it to establish. So while, like Kiran said earlier on, we have several laws, there are several officers involved, the problem becomes when we move that crime out of the lab in the forest and then start presenting it to the judiciary, because there a whole new kind of question and answering will happen, which will determine the fate of the case. Very often, something as simple as, is the judge empathetic to this crime? Does he understand why the forest officer is saying that this needs to be looked at seriously? Or does he even know the law at all to begin with? So very often judges are not even exposed to the fact that there is wildlife law, or what is the extent of that law, what are the powers under that law. So these are very simple factors which both Kiran and I are trying to address through our respective training programs when we deal with the forest department, with judges, with judiciary. However, there's lots that remains to be done. So if we were to just talk about what needs to be improved, the entire thing needs to be improved. The system needs improvement. Forest officers need to be trained more investment of money has to be made, of infrastructure. Judges have to be exposed. Thankfully, now with the fact that media is taking greater interest in wildlife matters, the fact that people like all of you who've made the time at 6:30 in the evening to join us on our Instagram chat shows that there is increasing interest in wildlife matters, which means then automatically that politicians have to start taking an interest as well and start putting in place proper policies, funds, so on and so forth. So the hope exists. Whether or not we will see it through in this lifetime is anyone's guess, right? So that's what my bit is. I can see that even more questions are coming in.
Yeah,
and like I said, we'll save the last 20 minutes for the questions, unless we're done talking before that, because then it'll become a clutter of information. Yeah. And Kiran and I can keep talking. So if you keep asking questions, we'll keep talking. So yeah, hold on. All right. So Kiran, I think now, the key thing to understand is, even though we've just received the report of tiger numbers going up, and while it's great news, what do we need to do as a country to ensure that not just tigers, but all species get better protection from wildlife crime? Because there's also pangolins. We don't have a pangolin day that's celebrated with the same amount of, we don't have a project pangolin, we don't have a project gecko, we don't have a project monitor lizard, right? So what, in your professional opinion and your experience with the forest department, can we do differently to help bring greater focus to those areas?
Yeah, so as Samyukta correctly pointed out, and there was a question also, like a lot of focus on tiger, but
Yeah,
not on other
forests are
species.
not
So
talking about. Yeah.
yeah, so basically, see, tiger was supposed to be this umbrella species under which, if you protect tiger, and it's a keystone species. A tiger requires a habitat where there is a lot of prey, where there is if the prey have to survive, then there needs to be water. If there needs to be fodder, there needs to be ample food for the deer to survive, and then hunting those deer, the tiger will survive. That was the whole ecological kind of model on which this whole thing was processed. And tiger at the end of the day is like being treated like a brand, and the tiger numbers have been treated like currency. Like the tiger number is increasing, that means the value is going up, but we need to hold on to our cards as well. And the number increasing is a good sign any which way. But then what will happen next is where will those tigers go? Because tiger, all said and done, it's a territorial animal, it's a carnivore. So you can't cramp 10 tigers into a one room and pack them like a sardines. So they'll require their space. And once that thing is, the once the tigers have established themselves in the current protected area network, then where will the rest of the animals go? If they venture into a human dominated landscape, then there are some questions about conflict. So there is nothing like a law which deals with conflict, because it's a ecological kind of a problem wherein which humans and tigers are interacting in a different form, or their interactions have increased. So like you say, if we go back to say 1901, then there were tigers right on the doorstep of Mumbai for that matter. So now we can't go back to that scenario where those tigers can walk into Mumbai city, or Pune, or Delhi, or Hyderabad for that matter. So that way, the numbers, if they keep on growing, then that bound to have conflicts, more mortality, because right outside protected areas, you will get national highways, railways, canals, and mines, and those kind of infrastructural activities, which we have already seen in Milind and Anish's talk. They were talking about all these things. So these activities will happen. So what we'll have to do is we need to, and plus the problems of poaching, hunting, illegal trade, and the pressures associated therewith have not reduced. So, and that demand has also not reduced. So tomorrow, if one person aspires to have a article made of a wildlife product or a wildlife product, so next day maybe 5 more people want to do that. And with social media, more connectivity, internet, now these things are also spreading in a rampant way, and they have found new avenues for display, trade, and transportation as well in certain cases. So that needs to be, which Samyukta touched upon, the trade of illegal pets, like she said, feng shui. With the increase in popularity of feng shui, turtle trade started increasing. Trade in turtles. There was one more question about turtles by Sneha. So those kind of things, the turtles. So now there are, earlier there was only star tortoise, or say soft shell turtle, which was in trade. Now there are 20 more turtles which have come in trade. And then there is a problem with identification, because a forest guard who has not seen a turtle from say Uttar Pradesh or Tarai may encounter one in Mumbai in Crawford Market, and then he is not able to identify that. So now these kind of challenges have also emerged, and it's up to us, like NGOs, forest department, to deal with them with terms of technology. Now you have Google Lens, you can scan a picture and you can get certain things identified. So maybe those kind of apps, digital tools can also be utilized for dealing with crime as well. So
Okay.
that was something.
Kiran, so I've been told that we're running short on time. So I'm going to quickly pose some questions to you. Maybe you want to field these. We had a question that said, is there any particular instance where the local community has set a benchmark model on the conservation of tigers other than the one in Periyar Tiger Reserve?
Oh, yes. So see, local communities do have a greater role to play, and they do play a huge role in terms of protection of wildlife as well, because they are the ones who are actually at the fringe. So tomorrow, if a poacher comes and tries to hunt a tiger in, say, Tadoba, Kana, or any park for that matter, he'll first encounter a local. He'll go to a pawn shop, he'll go to a kirana shop, he'll have a tea or something like that. If that
Yeah.
local is aware and he has to, he knows about what his intentions are, he can tip off the local forest department or the enforcement agency, and the pressure can be averted much before a big damage has been done. So local
Right.
communities do play a huge role into the whole scenario. But at the
Yes.
same time, the local communities also can help aid certain aspects, like give them tip-offs and things like that. So poachers, we have there have been incidences where poachers from right northeast have come to Corbett and hunted
Right.
elephants. So those kind of interactions also do happen. So it's not a straight yes, yes, no, no kind of a scenario, but
Right.
all these things are interconnected for that matter. So
Okay.
we need to. So I think that should address that question. I think.
Okay. There's somebody who sent a question which you kind of
Yeah.
answered earlier, which said, is there a need for wildlife laws to be more considerate of forest dwelling communities in order to better tackle conflict?
Yeah. I think that is kind of covered, but because conflict is something which is happening on a daily basis, and we
Yeah.
are looking at wildlife carnivore conflict. But the bigger part of conflict, which is hidden, which is like they say, tip of the iceberg is tiger killing a cow, but the bigger iceberg is pigs raiding crops, nilgai, blackbuck,
Yes.
monkeys, and these herbivore farmer conflict or herbivore farm intrusion conflict is far bigger conflict, and
Right.
that needs to be seriously addressed, but that may not come under the ambit of law, which need to be a management oriented practice, which will help in dealing with that. Yeah.
Okay, super. I think we'll just take one last question before we conclude with more closing words. There's a lady who said herpomania. So much needs to be worked out. What happens to the live animals captured, tried,
Yeah,
husbandry
yeah.
until held till court cases worked out, funds for the same,
Uh,
etc.
yes. Yeah.
So, do you have any thoughts on that, Kiran? Case property, I
Uh,
think, is what she's
yeah,
referring to.
she's talking about case property, and
Yeah.
also lots of things, like especially in terms of turtles and stuff like that. There needs to be a lot of education, because this smaller fauna and especially a lot of amphibians are into trade for pet trade, and there is a lot of ambiguity in terms of how amphibians, butterflies, marine taxa. So the
Yeah.
identification, handling, animal handling skills as well. So tomorrow, if you confiscate something like consignment of 500 turtles, what to do with those 500 turtles? These are the
Yeah.
kind of what you say focused approaches. So maybe every forest guard doesn't need to know all this, but we need certainly 50 people across, or say three people per state who are into snakes, who are into marine taxa, who are into these kind of specific, what you say, specific trades, so that it will be better handling, better management of these practices for that
Okay,
matter.
super. All right, Kiran, quickly, any closing thoughts on what, in like 2 sentences, because we don't have time, is how has your role as the head of wildlife law enforcement, how do you think it's contributing to the conservation of tigers?
Yeah, so as of today, Wildlife Conservation Trust have conducted lots of training programs, about close to 300 training programs, and we have trained about 14,000 forest guards across the country. So that's a big effort that we have put in. And the first step is kind of to make them aware about the laws, make them also sensitize them about the laws. once we do that, then the second step comes in where we need to, which you address, like all the evidence gathering, collection, and those kind of things need to be
Yes.
addressed. See, in olden days, even proving the place of occurrence was a
Was
big
very
challenge.
difficult. Yes.
Yeah, whether
Yes.
it was in a core zone or non-core
Yeah.
zone, you couldn't prove. But now with
Correct.
GPS, you can prove it easily. So now that is
Right.
slowly, these things will breed into the system. And once
True.
that thing improves, it will slowly. But the other point is, you can't expect results. Now what we need to focus on is process, because results is a court case which can last for 10 years, 20 years, 15 years for
True.
that matter. So what we
True.
need to focus on is the process of improving the overall conduct of the crime enforcement
True.
part of it.
True.
And once that is done, the results will follow in for sure. So we are not still
Yeah.
into the results zone yet. We are still processing. We are still walking on the longer path. I mean, I'll put it that way.
True. Okay, Kiran,
Yeah.
do you want to give out your email ID so people can reach out to you if they have any questions?
My email ID is Kiran, Kiran, @wctindia.org.
Okay, super.
Yeah,
So
Kiran, that's my name.
yeah.
And
So I'm going to just make two quick housekeeping announcements. Is that following this session, Rushi and Vikrant are going to be doing the session that was not working earlier on. It's going to happen. Like I said, for those of you who joined in later, our session with Sheetal and Girish will be rescheduled again at a later time so that you can listen to them at much greater detail and at a comfortable pace. Secondly, if all of you enjoyed Anish and Milind's talk today, we have a great interview with Milind on deconstructing wildlife corridors, connectivity and mindsets on our WCT website. So please go on there and read that as well. That will also throw more light. I'm just going to quickly close with my closing thoughts. Kiran has already thrown a lot of great light on several issues. Is that while we talk about tigers, it's very important to understand that tigers are one of the many species that are affected by wildlife crime. And perhaps because this is International Tiger Day, it's important to talk about the crime against tigers, because if people can go out and kill an animal as charismatic and as important as a tiger, one can only imagine the kind of apathy there is in the system to much smaller animals that are killed in far larger numbers. So Kiran's work is great about training enforcement agencies and putting systems in place, and I'm also trying to boost alongside that to kind of train the frontline staff to understand how to process a crime scene really well, and all alongside also train judiciary, make them more aware so that when that case does come to them, and like Kiran said, whether it takes 15 years, 7 years, 10 years, at the end of it there is some good judgment that will come out because the judge is now better aware or he understands the issue better. So he may also take a personal interest in the matter to push it to a logical conclusion in a better way than it used to be many years ago when the system was just full of apathy. So I hope that both Kiran and my work, and maybe next year this time when we do these sessions again, we have more interesting news than just tiger numbers. Maybe we can report increase in convictions also to you. We hope that that's the good news that will come from our sides. I'll also leave you my email ID in case any of you have particular interest in forensics and want to just understand that more. My email ID is Samyukta, SAMYUKTA @WCTindia.org. I'll just type that in here, and our website has all our email addresses, our contact details, so you can just go to the WCT India website and get whatever information you need from there. Thank you to all 32 of you, 33, 35 people who joined in and stayed with us and have been sending us interesting questions. We hope to engage with you in the years to come, and we hope to hear more from you. Happy International Tigers Day again to everybody. All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a great evening. Bye, Kiran. Thank you.
Bye.